I'm Anne Raimondi, a very proud Gusty on the board, and then COO of a company called Asana, which is a project task management, work management platform. But I much prefer to introduce myself with a few other fun facts about me. I have 3 kids and an amazing husband. If you are into personality profiles, I'm an INFJ in Myers-Briggs, Enneagram 2, which really means I love people, I love culture. This is why this topic matters so much to me. I love cooking. I am a big fan of small businesses, so probably a little bit too addicted to Etsy. And then my favorite place on earth is a tiny little bookstore in Paris on the left bank called Shakespeare and Company. If you haven't been there before, it is an amazing place. Weirder things to know about me. Small businesses have been a passion of mine, or startups. So I was early at SurveyMonkey, so if you ever need a survey designed, I can help you with that. I once worked in retail and had to ship product, liquidating product across the company or across the country. So if you need a trucking resource to liquidate clothing, I can also help you with that. I was early at a company called Blue Nile, which sold diamonds online during the first .com boom. So I can, in a pinch, grade diamonds for you and tell you best value. And then after Blue Nile, I was at a company called eBay in the early days. So you can see some of the themes of what I love, which is small businesses, entrepreneurs. So know a lot about collectibles, know a lot about Beanie Babies, as well as how to auction items. The things in the middle are family related. My husband is a beekeeper, so if you need to replace a queen in your hive, I can also help you with that. I may not help you switch it out. That's really my husband's job. It is as violent as it sounds, but it does create a healthier hive. And then all 3 of my kids play water polo. So if you want to know what all the whistles mean, I can tell you what those mean. And then just a little bit more, I really believe in the journey, both personal and professional. So I married into a large Italian family. We celebrate like nobody's business, all holidays. Those severed limbs in that picture, I own those severed limbs. We turn our garage into a haunted house most years. So if you need to borrow severed limbs, or you're in San Jose during Halloween and you want to come check out the haunted house, you're always welcome. Speaking of the journey, back to early stage companies I've been at, as part of the TaskRabbit team, I once drove a Rabbit van in Austin at South by Southwest, which was super fun. And then in terms of celebrating, I converted a Barbie van into a replica to celebrate the person on my team who found a shop that actually can wrap your van into a rabbit. So those are ways to sort of celebrate your employees. And if you need a hot glue gun, I have 4 of them. And then in terms of the journey, I had the privilege of being part of a company called Zendesk. So got to stand on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange when we went public. But the best part of the celebration really was our founders, because the journey, whether you're small or big, comes back to founders and what founders imbue into their companies. And so I know all of you are founders of businesses, and whether you continue to build your business to become a public company someday, or you want to keep it a small practice, that whole journey and really celebrating in your own way is so important, and that's all part of culture. Karaoke is a little teaser for, I am not a karaoke singer, I will not be singing today. It's a little teaser of a story that I have later about culture. And then last but not least, speaking of journey, the way I regroup and refresh, I'm a runner, and running is activity that is very humbling because you got to get up every morning or most mornings and go on that run. Some days are good, some days are bad, but it is about just waking up and having that commitment. And that's something that all of you do every single day. It's waking up, whether things are challenging or things are great, it's continue to invest in that journey. And so the topic today is like, how do you make that journey more enjoyable, and this whole concept of culture. I want to start, though, by grounding on where we are and likely what you're all experiencing. The last few years have been full of change. And likely you all have had to adapt your businesses with the macro changes, with coming out of COVID. This survey that was recently done of small business owners said that almost 80% of small business owners believe that they are going to need to adapt and change in the next 2 years to stay relevant and competitive. Whether as a founder or for employees to go through change, adaptivity and being able to reimagine who you want to be and what you need to do differently, it turns out is not always something that people look forward to. But there is something that helps us with change. It turns out there's something that makes change easier, and that's having an effective culture. So James Heskett is a professor at Harvard Business School. He's been studying great organizations, large and small, over the last 40 years. And the thing that he and his team have discovered on the best companies, the most adaptive, the most agile, the most enduring, is they have a really effective culture. And that culture helps them adapt. It helps them see around corners. It helps them motivate employees to be excited about the journey. But culture as a topic can feel very squishy, right? Oftentimes it's like, oh, it's a good culture or it's a bad culture, and can feel very amorphous. So today, I want to introduce a way to make culture more concrete and more actionable. And that's really thinking about culture as a system of reinforcing, connected, complementary components, that if you build them all together, that they actually make your culture stronger. So there's 3 components in this system. There's your mission, there's your values, and there's your norms. And we're going to cover sort of each of them and what are they and how do you make them come to life for your business. So think of mission as this is really defining your impact in the world. What problem are you solving? Who are you solving for? And why does your company exist? Why does your business exist? What's the difference you want to make? To bring that to life, I want to share an example, because oftentimes, again, it's like, great, I should write a mission statement, but what does a good mission statement look like? This is the mission statement of a company called Brilliant.org. I had the privilege of talking to their founder, Sue Kim. She is really passionate about bringing STEM and STEM learning into the world, but in a really specific way. So Sue took the time to write a mission statement, and it's one of the best that I've ever read because it's so specific, and it's also pretty inspiring. Right? She really wants people to achieve their goals in STEM. A few things that really jump out at me, she wants to, and how she's going to do that with her team is she's going to enable great teachers to illuminate the soul of math, science, and engineering. So even just those words are evocative, right? The soul of math. When was the last time someone was like, I am embracing the soul of math? But you read that and you're like, okay, I'm going to sign up for Brilliant.org because I want to find the soul of math. And so I want to share this example with you because as you think about either writing yours or reviewing yours, is it unique? Does it really tell your story? Is it specific about who you're there to serve and the impact you want to make on the world? The second component is values. And again, values are one that we probably always talk about, and people might highlight values like integrity or kindness. I'm going to encourage you to think about values as your behavioral compass, and that your values should have an opinion. They should be opinionated. They should really communicate what's most important to you and your employees. They should also communicate the things that you reward as well as the things that are not acceptable. They're an explicit choice. Your values should help you and your team members make decisions that are hard. That's what good values are. Oftentimes, right, we come back to those examples that I mentioned. Integrity, kindness sometimes are thought of as values, but the opposite is not necessarily about, like, that you wouldn't want a team where they're like, okay, the opposite of integrity is not having integrity. It's like integrity is a baseline. Kindness is a baseline. You want your values to actually be much more specific and a choice. So what do I mean by that? These are the values for Airbnb. How many people are Airbnb customers and fans? Yeah. So what I love about the Airbnb values are they're simple, They are specific. If you didn't know they were Airbnbs, you could get a feeling of who this company was. There's two specific ones I want to call out. One is be a host. I love that is both what they have as a platform and encouraging people to be hosts, but then the bigger picture of what does it mean to be a host? What does it mean to be inviting? What does it mean to be caring and open? So that play on words there. And then, of course, the one, be a serial entrepreneur. Love the play on words, but also that they're encouraging not only their customers to be entrepreneurial, but their employees as well. So I take a lot of inspiration from Airbnb's values because, again, they're specific, they're evocative, they're choices. And so as you think about codifying your company values, keep those in mind. And what are some that are really unique to you and very special? And then last but not least, norms. Norms really are how all of it comes together. These are also the choices you make on things like your processes, your cadences, your systems, how you make decisions. It's really how the actual work gets done, and those choices that you're making. So an example of this, I had the privilege of chatting with and working with a founder of a venture capital firm, Josh Kopelman, who founded First Round Capital. They're one of the most successful, repeated early stage investors, and something he was working on with his team to really codify was decision making. Decision making is such a part of reflecting what your culture is. It can also be the thing that's the hardest or the most confusing, or oftentimes employees want to understand how are you making decisions, why did you make this decision? So Josh, despite having a pretty amazing track record, decided that it was time to really codify and improve decision making. So he partnered with an author, a behavioral scientist named Annie Duke. I highly recommend her books. One is called How to Decide. She used to be a professional poker player, so really studied decision making, especially decision making in uncertain circumstances. So she worked with Josh and team to really codify and improve their decision making processes. But you don't have to partner with a behavioral scientist or spend a lot of time on it. They have published a lot of really simple frameworks, and one that I really recommend is really just writing down your decision making. So this template is a really straightforward one where as you're making a tough decision that could go one way or another, have you outlined the choices? Have you been explicit about what you're excited about each decision? What you might be concerned about or where your team doesn't like about it? And then probably the most important part, are you writing down how you're going to mitigate the risks? So why take the time to do this? One, it strengthens your decision-making skills, and it's something to look back on. So if there's questions around how did we make that decision, or if there's anchoring on, wow, the outcome was great, it must have been a great decision, or the opposite, oh, the outcome was terrible, we must have terrible decision-making skills. What Annie encourages people to do is separate those, that don't anchor on the results to decide if you have good or bad decision-making habits. Build good, consistent decision-making habits, which will give you more likelihood of better outcomes. And so it's just a simple practice back to norms on, are you explicit in your team or company on how you make decisions? Decisions aren't the only norm to think about codifying, but they're one of the most important. So just wanted to sort of share that as inspiration. So we talked about culture now. You know it's a set of components. You know it's mission, values, and norms. The real opportunity for each of you is, what is your culture? Do you know what your system is today? Are you intentional about it? What do you want it to be? Where in the future do you want to take it? And then how do you build a roadmap to help you accomplish that future that you're envisioning? So to assess where you are today, I encourage everyone to take a culture pulse. So ask your employees, your customers, your trusted partners to help you describe for you, like, what is your culture today? You can, those components that I talked about, you could do a fancier survey, or if you just have a couple minutes, I'm also all about, like, just take a couple minutes and do something quick. You often get a lot of the insights. So in your next one-on-one with an employee, in your next customer meeting, in your next chat with a partner, ask them, what 3 words come to mind when you think about working at this firm or working with this firm. You're going to get a lot of insights there, both in terms of, are those the words you would use to describe your culture, or do any jump out where you're like, oh, that's interesting, or that's not exactly the culture that I want. That gives you that baseline of where you are today. And that's really important to understand, where are you, to then be able to set a culture vision for where you want to go. So think of this as your Mad Libs culture vision. I want to make it easy and actionable. So in 15 minutes, write out what your culture vision is. You pick the time frame. It could be 6 months for some folks. It could be a year for others. In this time frame, how will your culture be effective? What impact do you want to make? What do you want to focus on in terms of values? And then most important, what are you going to commit to do in terms of norms and practices to bring it to life? Don't worry about making it perfect. It's just about writing down where you want to go. Think of it as a great first draft. And then the most important thing is, don't just write it down and leave it there. Share it. Share it with trusted advisors. Share it with people you care about getting feedback from. Recruit them to help you make your vision come true. And then so you took a pulse, you know where you want to head, you've written down where you want to go. How do you build that roadmap? So this concept was one that the Asana founders really embraced, and it's still part of how we evolve and build our culture at the company. And that's thinking of culture as a product. How many people here are familiar with the concept of human-centered design or design thinking? That's applied to building software, it's applied to building consumer products, and the idea of human-centered design is exactly what it sounds like. Start with the people. Who is your customer? What pain point or problem are you trying to solve for? How do you build and iterate really quickly by building prototypes, testing them, getting feedback, and iterating? I like applying that to culture because it also helps us think about culture as something that evolves and grows and changes, that we can be intentional about. So if you take that culture pulse and you find some things where you're like, ooh, that isn't what I want my culture to be, instead of that feeling like it's good or bad or a judgment, think of it as a process and an iteration. So then go back to, what is the culture that I want to design? How do I do some testing on how to get it there? How do I build, evaluate, and iterate? So this is one of the concepts that I've found most inspiring and most motivating in terms of building a journey, building a culture that you're really proud of. So design, let's dive into that stage. That's really about, pick one thing you want to improve. So maybe in your pulse you found, hey, some of my values resonate, and some of them don't. And I want to improve my set of values. So that might be the thing that you pick. I worked with the founders when I was at Zendesk, and one of the things we decided we wanted to pick to iterate in our culture was how company goals were shared out. So we realized that over the years, as we set company goals, which were super important, they'd become, a little dry, a little boring. We'd write them out, they'd show up on slides, maybe we'd review them on a quarterly basis. If we were ambitious, they showed up on a poster somewhere. The sad reality is most employees, maybe they knew them, they certainly weren't excited about them, and very few of them could remember them without going to grab that slide. So instead of being sad about it, we decided, hey, we're going to apply design thinking to our company goals. Our intention was make them more memorable, make them more engaging, make sure employees remember them. So we brought together a group of people who were creative and fun, brainstormed ways we could change and improve them, built and prototyped something, and that turned out to be, I promised you I was going to talk about karaoke. We sang our goals that year. We had 3 company goals. One became a rock song, one became a rap. That was a very hard one to do. And then one became a country song. And so we took popular songs, rewrote the lyrics to be company goals. which is a little harder than it sounds like to make a popular song into a company goal that's engaging, but nonetheless, we did it. We had karaoke competitions. I will say that year, everybody remembered the goals. They could sing the goals. They had karaoke competitions about the goals. Some of them turned those into dance competitions. So, I share that story because it can take something where you might think about like, I got to improve company goals, to something where it's like, wow, that was really fun and inspired so many other creative ideas of how do we take parts of our culture and how we operate and actually make them memorable and engaging and involving. So I'm going to be excited to hear how many of you go back and sing company goals or sing something involved in your company or culture. The build and execute phase can also feel like, hey, if you've got just a couple of employees and so many customers and clients you're trying to serve and make successful, how do you make time for culture building? How does that not just be this other thing on a long list of to-dos? I think that, to me, is like really making it a priority, just bounding the time that you spend on it, but making a commitment to that, and just actively reviewing, am I spending the right amount of time to really achieve that vision of the culture that I want to build, that I'm really proud of, that really represents me? So a framework that I really like for this is it's called Tiny Habits. It's really about just embracing tiny habits that then change and add up to a bigger body of change, whether that's a personal habit or a professional habit. And so I once worked with a founder of a company called Guru, and what they were trying to do is bring the most important company values to life. They'd spent a lot of time on the values, but they were also recognizing, again, they had become something that was like an artifact, and it's something on the website, and maybe something in posters. But when you really asked employees, are you using the values? Are the values helping you make hard decisions? It turned out, not all the time. And so a very specific tiny habit that we worked on implementing is every team had team meetings. And so in the first 5 minutes, their anchor moment was team meetings. In the first 5 to 7 minutes of every team meeting, the tiny behavior was they would just ask anybody to share a story about a colleague that had really exemplified the company value. Some team meetings, there were a bunch of examples. Some, it was just one, but that was their habit. Every team meeting began with, raise your hand if you saw a teammate, whether they're in the room or they're not in the room, really celebrate a company value, share that story. And then the celebrations were, they created specific company value Slack emojis that they would then just share that story out in Slack. And so then over a month or of a quarter, all these different examples were shared, and they'd bring the best ones to company all hands. And then they'd give big awards at the end of the year for the people who really exemplified the company values. So those tiny investments of, hey, just give a shout out at the beginning of a team meeting, turned into lots of momentum around company all hands, turned into a great way to celebrate on an annual basis. But more than anything, it made people pay attention to the values and what were great example of celebrating company values. So that's how you can sort of take a tiny habit in a little bit of time and really making it into something that's a ritual for your company. And then last but not least, it's that measure and iterate. So decide on the frequency that you want to check in. It could be 6 months, it could be on an annual basis. Go back to surveying your employees, your customers, your trusted partners on how you're doing on your journey. And then review and reflect that feedback and decide what you want to take action on. You don't have to take action on all of it, that you have choice and agency in all of this, but taking the pulse will also help show you where you are, how far you've come, and then the places that you want to invest more in. The great news about measuring and iterating is everyone has access to the employee happiness survey in Gusto. It comes with Gusto. So you don't even have to design your survey. You don't have to go find it anywhere. You can get going right away. So I highly encourage everyone to take that time, get your baseline right where you want to go, design your roadmap. So bring it all back together. Today, what we talked about is defining mission. It's this system of reinforcing components that ideally really make each other better. So setting your mission, writing down your values, deciding on your important norms, and then building your roadmap using human-centered design. Design the culture that you're super excited about, and then invest the time to build and execute, and then measure and iterate. And before you know it, you will be waking up every day celebrating the culture that you have built, that you're really proud of, that reflects who you are, and the investment of time and resources and your and unique talent in building the business that you're all building already. So thank you for your time and hanging out with me. We are going to open it to Q&A, and I'd be happy to share more examples, answer any questions you all might have.
What would you say is the biggest watch out or pitfall when you're building your mission that folks should be mindful of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what's the biggest pitfall? I think with so much of this, and missions included, the biggest pitfall is wanting it to be perfect, and so then not putting something out. It's like the time spent wordsmithing versus just deciding, hey, it's good enough, and I'm going to put it out, and then committing to yourself, maybe I'll look at it in 6 months or a year, or I'll get some feedback. But that often is the blocker where people feel like, oh, it's so big, and it doesn't have to be.
One thing I've learned coming from a different community, but around the same thing, mission, vision, and purpose, they're all living documents. So you'll never get it completely perfect, and it should never be. So just keep that in mind. You have to start somewhere, but know that it will be a living document. It will be constantly changing, and it will be constantly growing.
Love that. It's also a good descriptor of us, right? We are all works in progress. So,
I'm curious. So we heard a lot today about talent shortage in the accounting industry and working, in sales and partnerships. I know how hard it is to just be constantly focused on the next thing, and there's just always so many tasks during the day, which I'm sure you all likely feel. So I'm really curious if you have any advice on how do you balance prioritizing doing the work that I know would need to happen in order to do that well versus just getting through your day to day.
Yeah, so just how to make sure you shift out of react mode. So there are a lot of experts, I'm sure, who have lots of opinions about this. We study it and think a lot about it at Asana in terms of focus and flow. Probably one of the most straightforward things we recommend people do is really kind of reimagine your calendar and your week and your cadence and try to be as intentional as you can about that, even if it begins with setting an hour aside a week, right? Back to tiny habits. This is the hour a week that I'm going to do forward thinking. It's just an hour, or I'm going to invest in the culture. Pick a day that's reasonable for you and a part of the day where you do good thinking, and just commit to that. And you don't have to finish anything in the hour. That's the other thing, is not try to be I'm going to try to jam all the 14 things into that hour, and if I don't do all of them, I'm unsuccessful, and I'm going to move that spot off my calendar. It's really, again, building that habit of every Thursday morning with my cup of coffee for an hour, I'm thinking about culture. Some weeks, I'm literally just thinking and reflecting, and that's a successful hour. Some weeks, I go do the survey or I wrote out the vision, but it is that sort of commitment of time, and it builds up and starts rewarding you for that.
When you were talking about culture, it seemed to me like what you were saying was it's important to cultivate your curiosity. And I was curious to ask you, what are the key questions that you ask that signify healthy culture? What are those questions? What do you make sure gets answered as you explore kind of those issues?
Yeah, the question around healthy culture, I think it is that those components are reinforcing one another, where where if it's your team, they can sort of describe, oh, we really value, I'll give concrete examples. I had worked with a founder where one of the most important values to the company was don't take yourself too seriously. And it really reflected like a sense of humility and humor, as well as not being arrogant. And so on that one, it really was like, do our practices and norms, do our customers describe us that way? And so how he would evaluate and the team would reflect really was, hey, are our practices, our interview practices, looking for people who don't take themselves too seriously? Do we have specific questions that people ask that highlight that? When we meet super smart people, though, that are taking themselves too seriously, how do we invite them into our company or not, as employees or not? Because that might change the culture. So sort of taking the value and then breaking it down to how are we reinforcing it and living it. Other things that that particular founder did that, again, quick, we had all the employees just very quickly on sticky notes write the values that they use the most often, and then wrote the values that were most confusing to them, and then just sort of grouped all of that. And that created a lot of insights on what they were relying on. And in that example, one of their values had been, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And that was one that employees highlighted was, hey, this is very confusing because we actually don't know how to put it into practice. And specifically, employees were saying, we say it's a marathon, not a sprint, but what if I have to do something quick? Like, when do I do something quickly? When do I put something out that might not be perfect and might not be for the long term? Or should I just not do that? And so they actually took that feedback and evolved from the value of it's a marathon, not a sprint, to embrace the journey, be intentional. And so while you're like, okay, do they say the same things? By just shifting the language, employees were like, I get that. We're here for the long term. I want to be intentional. But being intentional can also mean I'm intentionally doing something quick to get some quick feedback. And so that really sort of shifted the level of engagement with that value and the understanding. So it's the like, how do you break it all down? Yeah.
So we're a growing accounting firm with about 45 team members. I remember 15 years ago when I was working in Fortune 500 companies, you walked into the building, the mission, the values, it was plastered everywhere. You remembered them. They were ingrained. Today, fully remote, we do have mission, we do have vision, we have core values, and once a quarter, on Zoom, I walk everybody through it, and it's just a tagline. The issue we have is our leadership bench and our middle managers. I don't think they communicate to their team what our mission, vision, and core values. You're part of a large organization, multifaceted. How does that transcend departments, teams, without actually going into a building?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Just sort of like, how does remote and distributed workforce sort of impact that? I think it does go back to this curiosity. So maybe what I would recommend is beginning just your managers, distributed, your employees, you're reinforcing them on a quarterly basis, but maybe, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to sort of ask them, hey, when was the last time you referenced the mission or the values, or how do you use them today? And maybe their answer is like, I don't use them consistently, right? And that might spur some conversations, and again, that designing the brainstorm, how could we use them more? What might be ways that we celebrate or reinforce them that also doesn't rely on you always doing it. So for Asana, in terms of how we reinforce it across our different locations, across the different teams, it is through rituals of teams sort of celebrating employees that exemplify certain values, us really making sure sort of simple things. We, for our all hands or anytime we're doing internal communications, we always begin and end with our mission and reference the mission. The mission is actually, for Asana, is also something that we reference even in our customer communications and like bring it all back to the mission. So some of it is just finding those forums that are very regular and thinking about, hey, how might we instill our mission in that moment or our values in that moment. But I would also, you've got, 45 probably talented, motivated, thoughtful employees. Like, I bet they have great ideas and probably a desire to give feedback on like, hey, these might be ways. And then try them, prototype, right? Like, they don't have to, again, be like perfect ideas. Just have a small team, work on a couple of them, test them out, and see how they kind of expand and grow.
One of our values is fanatical attention to detail. And maybe it's too hard, I don't know, but since talent is hard to find, and we recently have an employee that's been with us for 3 years who keeps making mistakes. And she's basically like, you got to take work off of me. And she's always changing her schedule to cut more hours back. And I know why she's making more mistakes. She took on a course May 1st, and she's got a lot more going on in her life, so she keeps saying, I'm spread too thin with work. So my question to you is, when you have a value that someone has been successful with in your business for many years, 3, who's now failing time and time again, how do you handle somebody in that situation to kind of refocus them or help them? I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, so it's really challenging for me.
Yeah, that's such a great question on sort of how there's a lot in there, both like performance management, but then also like what are the consequences of not living the values. And so maybe I'll take it a little bit broader. One of the practices we have at Asana in terms of our performance feedback cycles, we actually include feedback on the values as part of people's review and feedback, both like peer feedback and manager and self. So that's also another way to bring them to life is like self-evaluation. How am I living the values? Which ones do I want to improve on? But then also reinforcing with employees, living the values is actually part of performance and impact at the company. And there are consequences, if you're not embracing and living the values. So, in your case, maybe step one, if you haven't yet had the conversation, is, hey, just a reminder, this is something really important to us. We've seen you achieve it before. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And so then maybe it's putting it back on her of like, hey, what's the time frame in which you're going to, step one, recognition, that's great. What's the time frame you're committing to course correct and change, right? And then how do we support you in that?
Hi, thanks for being here. I love the idea of a mission statement being like incredibly aspirational, one you can probably like never truly achieve. Yeah. But like, do you think there is a line where it's too far, or like, if you have a very aspirational one, how do you bring it to reality to the team?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, can it become so broad and big that people feel like, oh, we're pretty far away from that? One, I would just first sort of ask, like, depending on where your mission statement is even just ask that question of employees, like, how motivating is this for you? How far do you think we have come in achieving that? And even just asking, like, how do they use it to sort of guide how ambitious to set goals? And then calibrate from there, right? If a lot of your responses are like, love our mission statement, but it feels so far off, what you might do is, hey, how do you add a little bit of specificity, or even how you take that mission and translate it into, hey, over the next 3 years, these are the most important things to get us to our mission. Because that also may help with the time frame, is keep that mission big and ambitious, but then help people sort of break it down into, hey, we'll be working towards our mission if these things happen in the next stretch of time.
I just want to say thank you, because I got to prod you a little bit about your thoughts at breakfast this morning, and it totally makes sense now. I'm curious, like, accounting firms, I mean, there are a lot of firms out here that just say, put your head down and work, you'll get rewarded down the road. And I'm curious if you can kind of speak to how to create cultures that work hard, because as a firm owner, I mean, I want to have a good time, but I want to be profitable. How do you balance culture and messaging, working hard, and work-life integration or harmony? How would you maybe coach other firm owners on how to set that tone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think why culture is so important is it comes back to how we spend our time, the people we spend our time with, they change us. They either change us for the better or they change us for the worse, right? And for many of you, those people, it's a small set of people. And you have a tremendous amount of responsibility to motivate them, take care of them, give them feedback when they're struggling. And that's a lot of responsibility. So I think of it in terms of and you have business outcomes and goals you're trying to achieve. I think of the question you asked, how do you balance all of them? I actually find that one of the most kind of unifying things for teams of all sizes, we talked about mission, but connecting mission back to an important component of mission is customers, right? Who are you serving? And so oftentimes that the remotivation for people is, hey, these are the things we're accomplishing for our customers, and even just having customers come and tell the impact and tell the story, so often that is more unifying and motivating than anything you could do. So incorporating customers into your mission statement, but then bringing it to life, because I'm sure your team serves really inspiring other business owners that are doing awesome things in the world. And so I often find that making that a frequent thing, again, sort of makes people want to work harder, not just for the sake of working harder, but because they see the end results that they're helping to drive.
Hello.
Hi.
By the way, at our firm, MyCore, we use Asana. We really benefit from it, so thank you.
Love that. If you have any feedback, need anything, please reach out. I always want the customer feedback.
Thank you. Thank you. So I feel like we have a strong mission statement and core values, but we don't really talk about norms like you did today. And I was just curious why it was that you spoke to that as well, and maybe just elaborate for a moment, if you could, about the importance of norms as part of kind of the whole culture conversation.
Absolutely. So what we found at Asana is norms are actually what brings culture to life day to day for employees, right? Because you can have that great mission statement, you can talk about the values, you can even celebrate the values, have the behaviors that reinforce the values, but how work gets done day to day is the actual experience employees have of the culture. And so policies, programs, how decisions made, that's the story that they tell themselves of what the culture is, right? That's their lived experience. So for example, if you have a value that's beautifully simple, that was a value at Zendesk, which is really clear. It's hey, we value simplicity, over complexity. But then if one of your norms or practices is, hey, we adopt all kinds of different software that's hard to use, then employees are going to say, that value sounds great. My lived experience is that our culture actually is complex. And so examining the norms and being specific and intentional about the choices, as well as editing and improving how work gets done, actually is how culture it manifests, for the majority of employees. Well, thank you again, and especially for the great questions, and also more than anything for the great work that you are doing for your customers and your employees. Being a business owner is not an easy thing, and so it's so great that everyone's here together because the community part is so important. So thank you for allowing me to be a small part of it today.